In this module we are going to be actually continuing our discussion on the different tools as far as authentication based attack is concerned. So, these tools as we have been seeing even in the past session were all used for doing specifically authentication based attacks, and these tools were something which was actually available with Kali Linux. So, in this module we will actually be having this as a last session for talking about the authentication based attack. So, in continuation with the SQL injection methodology that we actually talked about for doing an authentication based attack in the last module, here we are going to be talking about something called as a cross-site scripting. So, in short you will find in a lot of places this is actually referred to as XSS. So, cross-site, what is exactly is XSS? XSS is basically it is a vulnerability that could be found in web applications, where the attackers would actually try to leverage this vulnerability and sort of inject code that could actually be run on the clients. So, if a client is basically going to contact a particular a server, most of the times we find that if it is basically a web server, the client would be typically a browser based application like a Mozilla Firefox or an IE or some other equivalent browser. So, through this method the attacker will basically try to manipulate the web server in such a way that whatever information that the attacker would try to target, he or she will basically try to extract that information through this particular. If you basically observe any kind of a statistical analysis on the different kind of methodologies that typically an attacker has used as most popular mechanism for attacking servers, we find that typically it has always been this cross-site scripting approach that the attacker has actually taken, because this is something that is actually very common and it is a very easy mechanism that the attacker could actually make use of to ensure that the objectives of his attack are actually met. What are the typical actions that an attacker tries to do with XSS? They basically do a very successful complete site defamation, complete site defacing, where we would have also heard of lot of news articles in the media about certain particular websites getting hacked and then getting replaced with contents of some other location or just a picture or whatever it is, right. So, most of the times we will find that the attackers would have actually used this XSS method to do that particular job, or it could also be used for distributing the malware to the client. So, once a malware gets distributed, whatever that malware is actually programmed to do, it will basically be doing it on the clients, and then for all you know it could actually be stealing some personal confidential information from the client specific machine and then sort of shipping it out to whichever server the attacker would want. It could possibly be stealing sensitive info from websites such as your personal details, your credit card numbers, and so on and so forth. So, there is a whole plethora of activities that the attacker could possibly do once he has actually done a successful XSS attack on your system. By leveraging this methodology, an attacker does not basically target a victim directly, right. So, what we mean by this is in all the tools that we had seen before till now, we are always seen that there was one particular intended server that was actually tried to be attacked, and then depending on what kind of an attack is being planned, we have always seen that that particular system or that particular node in the network alone getting attacked or possibly compromised also if the attack is successful. Now, in this particular case what the attacker would actually try to do is the attacker would basically exploit a vulnerability within a website or web application that the victim would possibly visit, and then sort of have the visitor itself attacked, so that the same thing could actually be replicated across all the other servers that the client could actually visit, right. So, this is one of the most malicious ways of attacks because of this particular reason, where we will generally find that the victim is not just a single node or a single user or a single system, but it has got the possibility or the potential to have it actually replicated across multiple systems, because it goes and tries to affect the client from which this request is actually originating, right. So, how does this predominantly work? So, XSS can take advantage of any kind of scripting that could be potentially done at the client side, like it could be a Visual Basic script or ActiveX and Flash, because most of the times these things are all pretty much outdated today and not very popularly used in most of the applications that is actually getting developed today. We will be surprised to find that one of the most actively used mechanism for doing this XSS attack is JavaScript, right. So, I am sure that all of us would have actually heard about JavaScript till now, because that is something which is an integral part of our browsing experience today. And if you see in most of the browsers that are actually released and very popular today, you actually have a menu option which explicitly tells you to have JavaScript enabled or disabled just for this particular reason, right. If JavaScript is enabled, you will find that most of the times the client side validations are actually done before even your data is actually sent to the server for updation or for processing or whatever it is, right. So, that basically requires JavaScript to be enabled, but using that requirement of JavaScript to be enabled, you find in a lot of places where the attacker would actually induce a JavaScript to JavaScript function to get executed on your browser, with which he will basically be getting the job done of whatever attack he had wanted to do, right. So, in order to run a malicious JavaScript code as part of your browser, right. So, whatever browser you are actually trying to use, this JavaScript code has to actually get executed as part of the browser. So, the attacker basically has to first find some mechanism to inject that particular small function or the payload into the code that is going to get executed onto the browser, right. For this particular purpose, an attacker could potentially make use of any kind of social engineering mechanism that we had already seen with a few tools before in our previous sessions, basically to have the user get this vulnerable page with the injected JavaScript payload inside that particular page, right. So, here page we are referring to as HTML page, wherein HTML would have typically JavaScript code embedded inside it for doing different kinds of validations. So, the attacker would basically sort of convince the end user to actually make use of his copy of the page, which actually has this embedded JavaScript code inside rather than the original one, right. Once this has actually been done, the next thing the victim has to basically do is that he has to go and visit a particular site which lacks the requirement to have some kind of user input, right. So, if for example very simply a particular website is actually asking for the details of the name or email address or whatever it is, as part of that execution this particular injected JavaScript function, which is basically the malicious code, will run and do whatever is the harmful job that it has actually been programmed to do, right. Now, this is basically the most common method that could be typically used by the attacker, right. So, if you see for example a very small snippet of the code, if you actually have something like HTML and /HTML. So, these are typically the tags that is used to identify what part of the code is actually an HTML code, right. So, HTML basically is the starting HTML tag saying that henceforth the code that is being referred is HTML code, and /HTML essentially means that it is basically the end of the HTML code, right. I could actually have a comment that I have inserted here, and then this particular comment I basically do say that, let us say for example database dot latest comment, right. So, I am basically trying to execute the latest comment in the database that has actually got inserted last, right. Now, this particular page once it has got this infected malicious JavaScript code inside, has the potential to basically become vulnerable, wherein as part of my code that I had actually done, I could basically have some function that I am calling here. So, I could basically call a function called do something evil, in which the supposed infection, whatever the function that has to be done by that infected code is actually inserted, right. So, with this if I am basically running this particular page, what will actually happen is that the function along with this do something evil, that is basically this function that is being called and as part of this malicious code inject is also going to be getting run, right. So, now whatever it has actually been done as part of this particular function, when this particular page is actually getting loaded into the victim's browser, now I am going to have this function executed, because of which the intended objective of the attacker maybe trying to maybe steal some personal information or trying to steal some passwords or trying to steal some cookie related details or whatever it is, right, could be actually done as part of this particular function that is there embedded as part of this malicious script code, which will be getting executed as part of my function, as part of my page loading in the browser, with which the attacker would basically get the details that this function has actually been programmed by him to do, right. So, a very easy way to actually getting done, and the dangerous part here is that the victim or the end user who is actually invoking that particular page in all probability would not know that this particular code that has actually been loaded by his browser currently is something which has been infected, right. The danger here with respect to the JavaScript is basically because it has got access to all the objects that the rest of my web page actually has got, right. So, I could actually take some contents of the objects, take some privileges for that has been granted to those objects and so on, and then once that has actually happened, it basically becomes up to the extent of how the attacker basically imagines and what kind of attack he could potentially do, right. So, one example that has actually been given is here is that of access to cookies. So, as we had seen before with cookies we could do lot of things, and using this kind of a cross site JavaScript code, the attacker could potentially get access to cookies that in turn will contain maybe lot of personal or secret information that should not have been provided access to the attacker. JavaScript can also use XML HTTP request to send HTTP request with arbitrary content. So, this could be again another way by which some parts of my page could actually be sent out to arbitrary destinations which are being controlled by the attacker, right. If you see the extent of these kind of attacks that is actually done, that is basically the reason why some of the security advisors typically advise their end users to sort of disable JavaScript in their browser, because once the JavaScript is disabled in the browser, any kind of a cross site scripting attack that the attacker is trying to do by injecting a malicious JavaScript code will be sort of like a equivalent of a dummy code in the browser page, which will not be able to get executed at all, because the basic execution of the JavaScript itself has actually been disabled, right. There is a potential of extensive misuse that a attacker could actually do by having JavaScript related functionality enabled in the browser, where that is actually being used to access a particular website, right. So, there are actually different other tools that are actually available. So, URL snuff is one such tool. Basically it tries to take the output of all requested URLs and then puts it into what is called as a CLF. So, CLF is basically a common log format which is used sort of by almost all the web servers today as a common format of logging their output messages, right. So, the basic advantage here it becomes that in terms of any kind of processing that one has to do after this particular collection of data has actually been done becomes very seamless, irrespective of from which web server this particular data has actually come, right. So, there are actually lot of web analysis, weblog analysis tools that actually expects this to be only in this format, so that they will be able to do a seamless analysis of the data that is actually coming in from different web servers, right. So, to access URL snuff we could actually go into the network sniffer submenu and then select URL snuff in our Kali Linux installation, and then we use the -i option in URL snuff to specify what interface we want to monitor, right. So, we had seen a few other tools that also in the past that also requires the interface. So, URL snuff is also one such tool where we specify what is the interface on which this particular data has to be collected from. So, if it is for example ETH0, you specify URL snuff -i ETH0 and then it will actually start working. So, this is a sample output of how the data is actually collected and then reported. So, this is basically what we refer to as a common log format, right. So, one example output has actually been given here. So, another authentication attack tool that could be used in some situations is what is called as ACC check. So, ACC check is basically it is a password dictionary attack tool that is used with the SMB protocol. So, just to do a quick recap, SMB protocol is basically what is referred to as a Samba application that we would have actually heard of previously. So, which is typically used for actually sharing files across heterogeneous systems. So, for example, if I actually have a file in my Windows XP or Windows 7 or whatever it is, which I want to have accessed by my Linux system, one of the most common protocol that is actually used is SMB, which is actually available in my SMB file system format. So, the ACC check is basically a sort of a wrapper that is actually available over the SMB client binary executable, which is what is used by my client system for remotely accessing a file system on let us say Windows. So, if my client is a Linux system, I will run the SMB client on my Linux system to access the file system like an NTFS file system on my Windows system. So, because of the fact that this is actually working on top of SMB client more like a wrapper script, trying to do a sort of a password dictionary attack. So, we actually had looked at password dictionary tools earlier also. This is something that will be dependent and usable. This particular tool ACC check will be dependent and usable only if I actually have my underlying Samba package installed, right. So, Xinject is another packet injector tool that is there, which basically provides a command line framework for me to sort of build any kind of a packet that I want to build and then inject it into my network, right. So, I could basically have even powerful shell scripts that I actually could sort of build and then use for monitoring the network traffic in a very transparent manner, without the person who is actually sending those traffic ever getting to realize that this traffic is actually getting monitored, right. So, this is actually again another tool that is typically used for doing authentication based attacks. Thank you.